Howdy, my good viewers. I'm an undead cartoon rabbit now. Deal with it. So, 2022 was a pretty decent year for TV, wasn't it? Lots of big shows came out this year. Some were new seasons of existing shows, some were premiering series based somewhere within well-established cash cow franchises, and some were even original series all their own. I happen to be a socially inept shut-in, I know, shocking, right? So I of course had plenty of free time to sample a good chunk of all this new content, and I do occasionally like to make countdown list videos, so I figured why not combine those two things. Lots of YouTubers who review TV and movies make top 10 lists of their favorites each year, right? Granted, they tend to be more serious YouTubers who have the good sense to complete and upload those videos right around New Year's time, when they're sure to get the most views. Me, not so much, as you can see. What can I say? I am a slow script writer, and a bit of a windbag. Before we get started, a couple of disclaimers, starting with one that probably should go without saying, but never seems to with videos like this. As with any list of favorites, this is all subjective, and as a currently not-so-serious YouTuber, I'm doing this primarily for the fun of it. We all have our different tastes and/or criteria, and my favorites of the year will most likely be very different from yours. And that's okay. Makes discussing this stuff all the more interesting. So if I don't include a show that you would consider top 10 worthy, or if I rank one higher or lower on the list than you would have, or anything like that, please don't have a cow, man. I don't pretend to be the arbiter of what's objectively the best, or even to be a real critic. I'm just a dude. A dude who is here to express my own thoughts and feelings, not to tell you that yours are wrong if they differ. In fact, I encourage all of you to share your own opinions and recommendations in the comments. Disclaimer 2, and this one is admittedly a bit arbitrary, but it helped me narrow my choices down for the list. In the main top 10, I'm only including shows that released a complete season's worth of content from start to finish within the year of 2022. So no seasons that premiered in 2021 and had their finale in 2022, and likewise none that premiered in 2022 and ran into this year. There were some phenomenal partial seasons of some of my favorite shows right now that I nevertheless wound up excluding from the list proper. But the good news is, partly for the sake of throwing those series a bone, this time I'm going to talk about my honorable mentions before the main list instead of saving that for just before number 1 like I usually do in other countdown vids. Starting with Attack on Titan, the final season, part 2. I know some fans are still salty about MAPPA replacing Wit Studio, but I never really minded the animation style for the most part, especially since after the end of Season 3 turned the series' whole world upside down and transformed the central conflict into something more soberingly complex and gritty than ever before. A visual change to reflect that change in direction just feels appropriate. The story in Season 4 Part 2 continues to be a hell of a ride, with emotions and stakes riding high, and it hurtles to a literally earth-shaking cliffhanger. The action scenes and soundtrack are just as kick-ass as we've come to expect from AOT. The barricades and footsteps of doom scenes, need I say more? And we're treated to some of the most shocking, gut-wrenching, tragic, or just plain badass character turns in the entire series. Some of which, once again, change everything we thought we knew about certain characters and backstory up until this point. This is honorable mentions, so no time to say much more, and this is Attack on Titan, one of the most popular anime of all time, so probably no need to say much more either. Next, The Owl House, Season 2B, and the Thanks to Them special, aka Season 3, Episode 1. Episode 1 of a whole 3 because the show was cut short instead of getting a proper third season. From day one, The Owl House had a colorful, lovable cast of characters, a charming sense of humor, and an imaginative setting with oodles of potential for world-building and character development. And as solid and fun as the semi-episodic first season was in its own right, Season 2 is where they really capitalized on that potential, upping the action-adventure stuff and developing the ongoing storyline and drama. They took some real risks for a Disney Channel show, like going darker and more serialized, and significantly shaking up the status quo, not just in the tear-jerking finale, but several times throughout the season. And it's all just so damn good. The first of the 3 special episodes, Thanks to Them, proves that if there's a bright side to having less time to finish the show than originally planned, it's that the story will by necessity move/resolve at an exciting, efficient pace, and that it can totally do so without sacrificing or rushing the sincere, meaningful character work that makes this series such a sophisticated standout among its peers. Honestly, if this had been a whole season released in 2022 instead of a half season and a special, Owl House would not only make my main list, it would probably make the top 5. My Hero Academia Season 6, or at least the opening 13-episode arc that aired by the end of the year. We get easily some of the most brutal, nail-biting shit in the series so far. It's action-packed from the get-go, with almost every single hero and villain in the series showing their stuff. We actually have a few major characters getting killed off or maimed. And there's a welcome dash of moral ambiguity as the heroes do some arguably not-so-heroic things in their desperation to avert disaster, while many of the villains are more humanized here than ever. There's that massive reveal about the true identity of one of the villains that I unfortunately already knew about, despite how I usually try hard not to peek at manga spoilers when I'm really into an anime. And hey, look, members of Class 1A who aren't Midoriya, Bakugo, or Todoroki get some time to shine in this arc. I also want to mention a few shows that did have full seasons in 2022, could have easily made the list proper, and only didn't because there were just other shows that I loved even more. Obi-Wan Kenobi. When I heard there was going to be an Obi-Wan spin-off midquel thing, I didn't feel too strongly about it one way or the other, but it proved to be a pretty enjoyable miniseries and a chapter in this character's history that answered questions I didn't know mattered to me, and brought some welcome new dimensions and pathos to one of the saga's most important characters. Not to mention depicting on screen the moment that Obi-Wan Kenobi officially began to view Darth Vader from that infamous certain point of view, and actually making it work. In Return of the Jedi, that always came off to me as, well, what it was. The writers retroactively hand-waving away a discrepancy created by a twist that simply wasn't planned when Obi-Wan first told Luke that Vader killed its father. But taking that originally silly stretch of an explanation and building a story where it actually serves as a powerful culminating character moment, that was impressive. Most impressive. While we're talking about Star Wars, Andor was also pretty damn good, spotlighting one of the more intriguing yet regrettably underdeveloped characters from Rogue One, who always clearly had a weightier history behind him than a movie was ever going to have enough time to really do justice. I'm personally more partial to Obi-Wan, but Andor probably is the better series, and a commendable example of how you can in fact have a solid thriller set in the Star Wars universe, even without space wizards, laser swords, sharpshooters wearing bucket helmets, glorified cameos by fan-favorite characters, or any of that stuff they tend to rely on to guarantee these shows rake in those sweet, sweet numbers. Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities. I love horror anthology series, and Del Toro is one of my favorite filmmakers, so this show was a must-watch. I would say it's a better Twilight Zone reboot than the actual Twilight Zone reboot we got in 2019, but honestly, if it feels like an unofficial successor of anything, it'd be more like Rod Serling's other series, Night Gallery. Both shows even have their own different adaptations of Pickman's Model by H.P. Lovecraft. The stories all have something atmospheric, chilling, bizarre, ooey-gooey, or even emotionally complex to offer, though some are certainly more gripping than others, and like the aforementioned Twilight Zone reboot, they do sometimes feel a bit longer than necessary. In the end, while I certainly liked most of the stories themselves, I think the thing I loved most was just the fact that this show exists. A high-profile streaming service like Netflix, and a beloved Oscar-winning filmmaker like Del Toro providing this kind of vehicle for other less prominent filmmakers to show off their talents, while scratching that special itch for us horror anthology fans is just awesome. The Sandman. This long-awaited live-action adaptation of Neil Gaiman's legendary comic series was pretty good, pretty faithful, and pretty Similar to Cabinet of Curiosities, I personally love that such a show got made more than I loved the show itself. Definitely thoroughly enjoyed it, though, especially how much more presence the Corinthian had throughout the storyline without being too intrusive or lessening his menace. I'm very glad it did well enough to get renewed for more episodes, and I'm looking forward to seeing how those future episodes will bring some of my favorite parts from later in the comics to the screen. Well, without further ado, let's get to the actual damn list already. These are my top 10 favorite TV shows from 2022. Number 10. The Beavis and Butthead Revival. Nothing too complicated to say about this one, it's just funny stuff. I loved the new movie Beavis and Butthead Do the Universe. I was excited when I heard new episodes would follow it, and I was not the least bit disappointed when we got them. Our favorite pair of delinquent ass munches are not only still funny in the 2020s, their shtick is arguably funnier than it's ever been. With Beavis and Butthead pretty much unchanged since the 90s, but in present day, there's endless potential for the simple laugh-out-loud gags you might expect, some occasional experimentation, as well as that Mike Judge brand of deceptively clever satire that the series really got a knack for in the later seasons of its original run. And if that didn't bring enough new life to the show, starting with this season we also have segments with the dynamic dumbasses doing what they always do, but middle-aged. The kinds of hilarious scenarios that opens the door for, like unemployment, disability, jury duty, and more, pretty much write themselves, don't they? I do love, though, how Do the Universe ended in a way that seemed to be setting up the new season with B&B having canonically traveled from the 90s to today, but then the season just kind of ignores that by having other characters like Anderson and Van Driesen, who did not travel from the past, just appearing like always, not having aged a day. But then again, we have smart Beavis and Butthead presenting alternate universes like the Middle Age one, so maybe this B&B actually aren't the same guys from Do the Universe, but it's another alternate world where all of the cast happen to be born a couple decades later, or maybe it's like The Simpsons, South Park, Family Guy, etc., with that forever sliding timescale thing, especially since there was that other modern-day revival in 2011 and, I'm totally sitting here nitpicking the continuity of Beavis and Butthead. The fuck is wrong with me?
What? He's complaining about that? This is the dumbest dude I've ever seen in my life.
Number 9. Chainsaw Man. Based on the hit manga series, this anime had a lot of people hyped and a lot of people already disappointed from the first trailer. Once again, MAPPA's animation, it's not for everybody. Some didn't like it because of that, some didn't like it because they didn't think the final product lived up to the manga, some didn't like it for both reasons, and some for altogether different ones. And that's cool. Like I said, life is more interesting when we all like and dislike different things for different reasons. As for me, I'm a total noob who has never read the source material, so I suppose you'd technically be right to say I don't know what I'm missing. Much like Season 4 of Attack on Titan, I personally think the animation works pretty well for the most part, especially in the bloody, frenetic action sequences. Though, yeah, there are occasional moments of what should be simple character movement where I found the CG a bit unnecessary and distracting, but eh. Personally, I just went into this hoping for a cool new anime, and a pretty cool new anime is what I got, introducing us to a world where freaky, nightmare-fueled devils run amok, where humans hunt said devils and can make Faustian bargains for power with them, if they're prepared to pay a hefty price, of course, and where the Soviet Union still exists, apparently. Hope they go somewhere interesting with that in Season 2. I can see the main character, Denji, also making or breaking this for some audiences. For a Shonen Jump hero especially, he's uncommonly amoral and arguably sociopathic at times. But he's also just so damn honest about himself and his ultra-simple motivations that I can't help but root for him to cop that feel he's always dreamed of. I like to imagine if Beavis and Butthead ever did finally score, they might have a similar existential crisis like, now what? Unlike some shows that seem to not realize or not care what unwatchably repugnant people their protagonists really are, and just expect audiences to accept their unlikable traits as likable anyway somehow, this story is fully aware of its protag's very limited capacity for empathy, and frames that in some brief but legitimately nuanced and interesting ways. Particularly how Denji's life on the streets, surrounded by violence, selling off parts of his own body, and starved for any shred of real human affection, or how Power's nature as an instinctive killer fiend give both of them unique perspectives which uniquely inform everything about how they survive, how they process what their own emotions mean, and how they choose what or who in this ugly world they see fit to care about. It's that atypical, sometimes twisted, yet earnest way of getting to know the characters, in tandem with the show's nihilistic, darkly humorous, just plain hella entertaining tone that I think give Chainsaw Man a ton of great potential. It's one of the rare shows where you might come for the surface level edginess, like gory violence, shock value, and fuck you got mine attitude, but you'll stay for all the deceptively complex and fresh ways it draws you into the world and cast. Ways that hopefully will only get fleshed out better in future seasons. Not to snub the superficially edgy stuff, because that is a hell of a lot of fun too.
Whoa. Did you see that? I sure did. Yeah. Get it. Yeah. 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 Get it. This is great. Yeah. This is the coolest chick I have ever seen in my life. Yeah. Yeah.
Number 8. The Midnight Club. The latest, and apparently second to last, Netflix series by Mike Flanagan and company, and unlike all those other done-in-one miniseries, this was apparently actually intended to continue for more than one season, but it got cancelled after this first one. It's produced by and adapted from the works of Christopher Pike. No, not that one. I was referring to this Christopher Pike, an author of young adult horror and thriller stories, some of which I think I may have read, but not since way back in middle school, so I have no idea how the stories depicted in this show fare as adaptations, nor do I especially care because at the end of the day, they work well for the purpose they serve here. That purpose being kind of the opposite of how the storytelling premise worked in Are You Afraid of the Dark, another clear source of inspiration for the show. In Are You Afraid of the Dark, for most of the original series anyway, the stories were the main focus of each episode, and the Midnight Society kids sitting around a campfire telling the stories was more of a framing device than anything else. Whereas this is definitely not an anthology series. The main focus is on the titular Midnight Club, a motley gang of teens who meet up at night to tell scary stories, not just for the fun of it, but as something of a shared coping ritual, since each of them have some kind of terminal illness, and could find themselves face to face with the real horror of death any day now. In isolation, the stories range from okay to quite good, but they also reflect the characters telling them, what genres and styles they're each into, how they relate to each other IRL, the anxieties and damages they struggled with even before they knew they were dying, and of course how having that looming over them now affects each of them. Naturally, the darkest, realest stories come from the members of the club with the heaviest personal baggage. But as grim as the reality they all share is, there's this incredibly natural, good-humored, supportive, all-around very genuine sense of camaraderie between these teens that makes it really rewarding to watch them as they periodically hang out at a table sharing stories, as they bond and confide in one another about their fears, regrets, and futures they'll never have, as the more jaded and angry ones who have heard all the old platitudes and offerings of false hope sometimes lash out at their well-meaning friends and family, or even as they explore the dark, mysterious, maybe not supernatural history behind the hospice they're staying in and the Midnight Club tradition itself. The characters are all very distinct, well-acted, and each get at least one shining moment of their own, but the standout, and easily my favorite, is Ruth Codd as Anya. I can't help it, I always dig characters who are this brutally honest and unpleasant, but manage to be understandably so due to a sympathetic backstory, and enjoyably so due to their dialogue and force of personality being just that good. I think another reason why she's my favorite is because Anya's arc is kind of every great thing this show is about in microcosm. Young people confronted with their mortality way too soon, the ways they try to contextualize their lives, especially their mistakes, which can easily haunt a person more than ever when they know they're out of time to make things right, and how precious the kinds of emotional connections they make along the way truly are. It's ironic that this didn't get its well-deserved second season because that unintentionally made the message that the good things in life are all the more beautiful because they don't last, applicable to the tragically cut short series itself. I'd say it made good use of the time it had, giving us a mature and moving look at life, death, loss, hope, the power of stories, and perhaps most of all, true friendship.
Fucking dramatic, right?
Number 7. Harley Quinn Season 3. This show continues to be one of the best damn DC things out there right now. appealing to a more mature audience without being murky and overcompensatingly self-serious like the Snyder movies, and having a risque comedic approach that knows how to lampoon and subvert the superhero genre and its iconic characters in ways that are actually funny, smart, and refreshing, rather than hollow, distasteful trolling like much of Teen Titans Go. Again, if you like those movies and shows, that's fine, I'm just giving my honest opinion here. While you could technically say it's a DC parody done right, I also feel like parody and the connotations that word comes with might kind of undersell this show, because of how unironically you become invested in the characters and their endearing, ever-developing dynamics with each other. Even before they officially became an item, Harley and Ivy have been the emotional core of the series, and one that really works. All their bantery, chemistry, and sincerely sweet moments together always get you to root for them, even knowing they are, in universe, still supposed to be villains. Their goal as villains this season is to fucking take over Gotham by covering it in Ivy's man-eating superplants, and that does indeed result in some pretty horrific mayhem. But what's always more important to the audience, and ultimately to them, is their relatable goals as people, like having a healthy, happy relationship and making it work for both of them. I genuinely cared way more about seeing how these two would work through their challenges as a couple, or how Ivy would overcome the personal issues holding her back from her true potential, or how Harley would reconcile her image of herself as a villain with the reality that she's on increasingly good terms with Gotham's heroes, and stuff like that than I ever cared about, say, whether Batflick's apocalyptic vision of the future would come to pass or not. I do still have mixed feelings about this show's version of Jim Gordon. The amusement level of hyper-thespian Clayface is wearing a bit thin for me at this point, and I feel like that one episode really wasted the Mad Hatter. But whichever other portrayals or jokes in this season may or may not work for you, I think episodes like Batman Begins Forever demonstrate just how special this show's relationship with its source material can really be, as well as how much more competent these writers are at meta-commentary than certain other shows. The episode is an inventive, literal journey inside Batman's head that pokes fun at some of the character's goofier history and just how thoroughly played out the tragic night his parents died is after so many movie and TV retellings. But rather than pointing that out just to pat themselves on the back for how self-aware they are, the story is just as sympathetic and respectful as it is funny. It understands that Batman has kept enduring for this many decades because the character's whole deal, as played out or single-minded as it can arguably be, still is such a cool, fun, emotionally impactful, and inspiring one. Harley doesn't suggest that Batman would be so much better if the movies and shows just had him get over his dead parents already, but instead she empathetically encourages him to grow, evolve, and allow himself to be more than the one or two sentence summary of what Batman is about. Which, hey, is probably all he ever would have been portrayed as in a lazier comedy, instead of a series like this whose praises and jabs at our favorite superhero stuff ultimately come from a place of love, at least more often than not. That spirit of how people can always take it upon themselves to evolve, and how iconic characters can grow beyond the images of who and what they're supposed to be in the minds of others, also apply very well to Harley, Ivy, and even the fucking Joker of all people, all of whom go through some pretty big changes this season that feel surprisingly natural and promising for each of them at this point in the show. With all the series that have been getting unjustly cancelled left and right recently, I am beyond relieved that this was not one of them, because I can't wait to see where they'll take this power couple and all their super friends, enemies, exes, and frenemies next. Speaking of quasi-parodies that developed into something much more, particularly in a third season. Number 6. The Orville: New Horizons. I was one of those people who were pretty mixed on the first season of Seth MacFarlane's The Orville. You could tell from the very start that it was a labor of love made by huge fans of Star Trek who didn't just want to homage or spoof it, but really understood and sought to emulate that brand of endearing, sophisticated, and inspirational sci-fi storytelling that made Trek the classic it is. I found that a lot of early Orville episodes squandered their potential, though, with a lot of clunky attempts at comedy that occasionally got an honest laugh out of me, but the jokes more often than not were just awkward, juvenile, or tonally detrimental to stories that had otherwise genuinely engaging, effectively dramatic, and even thought-provoking subject matters. I know that type of doofy, quote-unquote adult humor probably helped get the show greenlit in the first place, though, since Seth MacFarlane is best known for being the Family Guy. So it was probably a safer bet to sell the Orville to the network and initial audiences as a comedy at first, and hope to refine it later into the more earnest Star Trek fanfiction that it was really meant to be. And thankfully that's what happened, as Season 2 was a ginormous improvement. It had a lot less of the dumb jokes. When there was comic relief, it was usually more natural and actually funny. And the character development, the creative sci-fi premises, and the fun space action were generally a lot stronger. Not only does the third season retain these improvements, it reaches higher heights than I ever would have expected. In the season premiere alone, there's a stunning upgrade to the show's already impressive production values, and an incredibly mature, deeply emotional story dealing with the nature of some damn heavy subjects like hatred, grief, and suicide. The episode A Tale of Two Topas treats gender identity, transitioning, culturally imposed prejudice and shame, and how these things can affect families with such empathy and seriousness that it feels like a great big apology for the infamously ugly and inept Family Guy episode Quagmire's Dad.
He wants to have a sex change operation.
Whoa, I knew he was gay. I didn't think he was that gay.
No, Peter, he's not gay. He's a woman stuck in a man's body.
Yeah, gay.
Well, look, let's just all agree that he's odd, huh?
Your ignorance makes me ill and angry.
Most of the season just keeps on framing and discussing the moral, ethical, relevant questions raised by its stories with a pretty deft hand. That's, dare I say, on par with some of the Star Trek episodes that dealt with similar quandaries around time travel, artificial intelligence, war, cultural tolerance, etc. And what's this? An entire season without any of the petty, unprofessional bickering between Ed and Kelly that was already super tiresome by the end of the first season? It can be done! And what do you know, now that they've actually gotten past that, they were all the better for it, both as characters and as a working team. Season 3 is also the show at its most serialized yet, with the ongoing Kaelon War ever developing, be it as large-scale as the Union gaining or losing a valuable ally in the conflict, or as small-scale and emotional as Charlie's complicated, gradually maturing attitude toward Isaac and the Kaelon as a whole. Said war storyline culminates in a powerful, enthralling penultimate episode that delivers epic space opera action right up there with the best space battles in Star Wars, Star Trek, or Babylon 5. New Horizons achieves all of this and more without ever losing touch with another essential ingredient that helps Star Trek capture so many hearts and minds, and that some fans argue current Trek series have lost touch with. Not that I necessarily agree with that, but I get where they're coming from. A sweeping sense of wonder, optimism, and passion for exploring the infinite possibilities of a massive, richly diverse universe while on an adventure with the people you love. The Orville has come a long way since that enjoyable but frustratingly flawed first year. Now it might actually be one of my favorite sci-fi shows in recent years, and I really hope it gets that much-deserved renewal for a fourth season sooner rather than later. Well, getting to the halfway point on the list took a lot longer than it probably should have. Told ya, windbag. I think we could all use a break right about now, so let's end part 1 here. Thanks for sticking around this long, and I hope you'll stay tuned for part 2, coming soon-ish.